In 1911, a British surgeon watched a group of penguins do something so disturbing he had to write his notes in code. He called them hooligans, and his report was locked away for 97 years to protect the public from the truth. Today, we're going inside that report. Our image of the penguin comes almost entirely from documentaries and animation. Tight-knit families, devoted parents, a single emperor standing guard over an egg in the snow. That image isn't false, but it's incomplete. It's the version that survived the editing room, because the first scientist to ever document a full penguin breeding cycle wrote down things so shocking that his own report was suppressed for nearly a century. This video walks through 5 realities of penguin life that rarely make it into the nature documentaries, building up to the single discovery that made one of the most respected naturalists of his era write, quote, "There seems to be no crime too low for these birds." In 1911, a British surgeon named George Murray Levick spent months living beside the largest Adelie penguin colony on Earth, the first person in history to observe an entire breeding season up close. What he documented was so far outside the expected image of penguins that it was pulled from the official expedition reports and locked away for almost 100 years. Among his observations, groups of young, unpaired male penguins forming loose bands on the edges of the colony. Birds Levick described as little knots of hooligans that repeatedly engaged in sexual coercion and physical abuse directed at chicks that weren't their own. Why does this happen? Researchers today point to something simple and a little unsettling. These are animals operating on hardwired instinct in an environment with an extremely narrow breeding window. A handful of weeks in October, hormones surge, pair bonds are still forming, and inexperienced young males, with nowhere to direct that drive, turn toward whatever triggers the instinct, regardless of consent or context. So if that's what happens on the edges of a colony in broad daylight, what happens to the bodies that don't survive the season? Every penguin colony operates under constant aerial surveillance, and the predator circling overhead isn't subtle. The southern giant petrel is a seabird with a wingspan over 6 feet and a hooked beak built for one purpose. It actively hunts penguin chicks that have strayed from the group or are making their first unsupervised trip toward the sea. The attack itself is brutally efficient. A giant petrel grabs a chick by the neck with that hooked beak, and chicks that wander off alone, even for a moment, are far more vulnerable than chicks that stay in groups. Meanwhile, on the ground, South Polar skuas patrol the colony looking for dead or weakened chicks. And if a parent senses its own chick is too weak to survive, it may simply stop fighting to protect it, not out of cruelty, out of math. One healthy chick raised successfully is worth more, evolutionarily, than 2 chicks lost trying to save a third that was doomed anyway. And remember, we still haven't reached the observation that sat unpublished for nearly a century. But even that isn't the crime that Levick was trying to hide. In one region of Antarctica, an entire generation of penguins disappeared in a single season. Not because of predators, not because of disease, because the ground beneath them vanished. In 2022, researchers tracking emperor penguin colonies recorded something catastrophic. In 4 out of 5 breeding colonies studied in one region, every single chick died. The mechanism is almost too simple. Emperor penguin chicks don't grow waterproof feathers until they're partially mature. If the sea ice beneath the colony breaks apart too early, before that happens, the chicks drown or freeze when they're forced into the water. Across the continent that year, roughly 30% of all known colonies, thousands upon thousands of birds, simply cease to exist. A colony can survive a bad year of predation. Petrels and skuas have been part of this ecosystem for millions of years. The population absorbs it. But a synchronized ice collapse can erase an entire generation in weeks, and the frequency of those collapses is no longer rare. What Levick witnessed was considered even more disturbing than this. Now imagine adding an invisible threat on top of that, one that doesn't care about ice at all and spreads through the air. We've seen how they treat each other and how the ice treats them. But there is a new invisible predator that is turning their greatest strength, their huddling for warmth, into their biggest death trap. And the most terrifying part? It's not just the penguins that are at risk. What scientists found in the air samples means the rules of Antarctic exploration have just changed forever. For decades, Antarctica was considered one of the last places on Earth untouched by a major viral outbreak. That changed recently. H5N1, the highly pathogenic strain of avian influenza responsible for mass deaths in birds and mammals worldwide, arrived on the Antarctic continent in late 2023. Gen 2 penguin chicks in the Falkland Islands were confirmed dead from the virus, with over 20 reported dead or showing symptoms, and at least one king penguin death was suspected to be the first of its kind for that species. By late 2024, hundreds of king penguins and elephant seal pups were found dead from the same strain in the sub-Antarctic Crozet and Kerguelen Islands. The most unsettling part isn't the deaths that have already happened. It's what scientists found afterward. Air sampling near penguin colonies that looked completely healthy still detected high concentrations of the virus, meaning some birds may be carrying it without showing any symptoms at all. Researchers warn this creates a spillover risk for anyone who gets close, including tourists and scientists. A virus that's already infected people, cattle, and dozens of other mammal species worldwide is now circulating quietly through one of the most remote ecosystems on the planet, inside animals that look fine. And none of it was the reason his report was hidden. And now, back to Levick's suppressed report, because it gets worse, and this is the fact that made him write that line about crimes too low to describe. Levick documented young male penguins engaging in sexual behavior with the corpses of dead females, some of which had been frozen and preserved for over a year. In the extreme cold of Antarctica, dead penguins don't decompose the way bodies do almost anywhere else on the planet. They're preserved, sometimes for years, scattered across the colony. To modern researchers, this isn't depravity in any moral sense. It's a side effect of instinct misfiring on a visual trigger, in animals that evolved no mechanism to distinguish a living mate from a frozen one. But to an Edwardian-era scientist standing in that colony in 1911, watching it happen in real time, it was disturbing enough that he encoded his notes in Greek so no one else could read them. And the Natural History Museum sat on the document for 97 years before anyone dared publish it. None of this makes penguins evil, or broken, or wrong. It makes them exactly what every animal is: a set of instincts refined over millions of years, operating in an environment that doesn't care about our expectations of cuteness. The tuxedo, the waddle, the family-friendly mascot. That's the version we built. The real version is a creature locked in a constant, brutal negotiation with cold, predators, instinct, and now, increasingly, with a changing planet and a virus that didn't exist in its world a few years ago. Maybe the most unsettling part isn't anything penguins do to each other. It's how long we manage not to look. If you learned something new, like and subscribe, because the next harmless creature on this channel might be one you've held in your own hands.